What is up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Fantasy Fellows Show. It is Friday afternoon. I'm just pounding out these NFC West videos today so that we can finish our 32-team projection series. We're working on San Francisco in this one. We do have Seattle next. I'm going to try and knock that out, and then we're done. Like all 32 teams, projection videos, 15 to 20 minutes long. I'm going to post a comment below for the playlist to all the 32-team videos. So if you guys want to check out some of those, please do. We're going to be kind of just doing a 2023 review. We'll talk about that first, and then we'll look at quarterback, running back, receiver, and tight end for the 49ers. I'm going to open up my projection document and show you guys what we're working at. And these are preliminary projections, so I'm going to be continuing to tweak these through August, but I feel pretty good about what I've got here, and we will continue to make some tweaks and things like that. But let's get right into it, man. The 49ers, like 2023 review, I don't need to really say much about this review because it was awesome. They went 12-5. They were the best team in the NFC. They just dominated. Almost 7,000 yards. This was the greatest season in the Kyle Shanahan era for 49ers. His 6,966 yards for an output. I mean, that was a good 300, almost 400 yards more than his best season back in 2021. And it all starts with Brock Purdy and Christian McCaffrey, man. Those are the two guys that run this team. And last year we saw 68.43% completion percentage. Brock Purdy himself was at 69.37, 4,577 passing yards, 9.32 yards per attempt. Is that even right? I don't think that is right. Let me get that number updated here. 8.69, or actually it was right. It was 9.32. Unbelievable. 33 passing touchdowns. That's also a high in the Kyle Shanahan offense. And then 12 interceptions is a pretty nice low. But, man, easily the most passing yards for Kyle Shanahan offense, easily the highest yards per attempt, almost the highest completion percentage here. But what's crazy is, like, it was his second fewest passing attempts. So, like, this is a low-volume passing team. They just had insane efficiency off the charts from Brock Purdy, and it just led to a lot of fantasy success and real-life wins. So 2023, the passing game was humming on all cylinders. And then the rushing game, man, like there's not much to be said about that. It was the most rushing touchdowns in the Shanahan era, 499 rushing attempts, which was the second most in the Shanahan era, but hit the 2,389 rushing yards, was the most in the Shanahan era. And then almost 4.8 yards per carry. Again, 27 touchdowns, only 3 fumbles. This is just one for the ages. This was one of the best offenses in football last year. And honestly, it's going to be hard to beat. Just looking at these numbers last year, Purdy was up at 69.37% passing, 4,200 yards, 31 touchdowns, the insane 9.64 yards per attempt last year from Brock Purdy. I get Lamar Jackson had a really good year last year, but I think the MVP should have came from this offense, whether you wanted to give it to Purdy or otherwise. I think Christian McCaffrey fully deserved the MVP nod this year or last year, and Purdy played great. But CMC was unbelievable, 272 rushing attempts, 1,459 rushing yards, 14 rushing touchdowns, 67 receptions, 564 receiving yards, and 7 receiving touchdowns. Just an insane year for Christian McCaffrey. If you drafted him, you had a lot of fun. But we weren't done there yet, man. All that Brock Purdy efficiency led to huge breakout years for Brandon Aiyuk. You also had Deebo Samuel getting 225 rushing yards and 5 TDs, almost 900 yards as a receiver and 7 touchdowns. So, like, we're talking well over 1,000 yards combined for him and 12 total touchdowns. Aiyuk was unbelievable, 1,342 yards, 7 touchdowns himself, and 75 receptions. And then you got George Kittle just quietly putting in another 1,000-yard season, 6 touchdowns, 65 receptions on just 90 targets. So his efficiency was insane. Same with Brandon Aiyuk, and then Deebo Samuel just continued to be a boss. Unbelievable year. I don't need to spend too much more time reviewing the 2023 season because it was one of the best ones that we're going to see. But to move it into 2024, we'll talk about the quarterbacks here now. But I think you have to, when you see a season like that last year, you have to kind of bake in some regression at almost all levels. And I kind of did that. I have them actually running the ball more than they did last year and passing the ball more than they did last year. I don't know if that's the right call because they like to run the ball and play kind of slow and just take their shots. But I have them throwing about 20 more passes and running about 11 more carries this year. So, maybe a half game's worth where maybe they're just getting an extra player or two per game from last year, but the efficiency is going to come down. I have Brock Purdy throwing 465 passing attempts, about 67.74% completion percentage, down almost a point and a half from last year. I have his yards down just a little bit, 4,155 yards, yards per attempt down, 0.7 points, basically 8.94 is the total, 29 passing touchdowns, 12 interceptions. So down a couple touchdowns, up an interception. I have him running the ball more as he's just getting more comfortable with himself in this offense, 45 rushing attempts, 175 yards, and 3 rushing touchdowns. He does like to do that every now and then. And a lot of people don't really see it coming, so it's easy for him to kind of scramble in the red zone there. But they added Josh Dobbs here at quarterback too, which is an interesting note. Hopefully you don't have to see him. I'm probably too high on some of these Josh Dobbs passing numbers, so I might look to lower some of those. Maybe I put in some to Purdy's column, or I just take some of those passing attempts off the board here. But I do expect them to run more plays than last year. Just maybe the efficiency comes down a little bit. So with that being said, where is Brock Purdy ranked among QBs? He is my QB 13. So I do think if you want to run it empty on your say your redraft team, you want to run it empty on QB, yeah, just take Jaden Daniels and Brock Purdy and call it a day. Just get a really nice duo. You can play the matchups. I think Brock Purdy's locked into a high floor. 4,000 plus passing yards and almost 30 touchdowns seems pretty inevitable. And he adds a little bit, just enough juice in the rushing column, especially like over a guy like Jared Goff or Tua. Like he can do a little bit more than those guys. So I'm drafting Brock Purdy as a fringe QB1. He's an excellent QB2 for Superflex leagues. Now, looking at the running backs, we're talking Christian McCaffrey, Elijah Mitchell, Isaac Guerendo, who they drafted, Patrick Taylor from Green Bay, and Jordan Mason's still there. I think we're going to rule out Patrick Taylor, Jordan Mason for now. And this backfield's all Christian McCaffrey. Like, we really don't need to spend much time on this. He's going to continue to handle a high volume of touches. I actually have his receiving workload coming down a little bit from last year, but I gave him more carries than he got last year, which I don't know if I agree with that now that I'm looking at it. I have him at 285 attempts. He had 272 last year. I have him at 1,415 rushing yards, 11 touchdowns. That's down from his 2023 totals of 1,495 yards and 14 rushing touchdowns. So a little decrease in efficiency there for him, but I have the volume kind of remaining the same, if not higher. And then as a receiver, I have him at 65 catches. He had 67 last year, 75 targets, 83 last year, and then 475 receiving yards, down from 564 last year, 5 touchdowns, down from 7 last year. So overall, I think you kind of have to turn the numbers down just a little bit. He's getting up there in age, which I know he's still elite, but he's getting closer to 30. And there have been talks about wanting to keep him fresh because this team wants to go to the Super Bowl and win it. They've been bridesmaids twice in the last handful of years, and they want to make sure that McCaffrey, Aiyuk, and Deebo and Kittle are all there to make that push. So maybe I need to lower some of these McCaffrey rushing numbers a little bit, and maybe we could do that right now live on spot. We'll go down 10 carries here, and let's just give it to let's give some to Jordan Mason here. We'll get him up to 10. And I'll give Guerendo a few more, which I need to do some more research on Guerendo yet. But overall, I think he's the lead back for number 3. I'm not quite 100% sure on that. So we'll do some research on that for you guys. But we also have a lot to parse, whether it's in training camp or preseason games yet. We have a lot to figure out there with those running backs. But let me just get some of these yards up here. Patrick Taylor will get up here a little bit, get those guys yardage a little bit better. But anyways, CMC is still a lock 101. You can take him first overall. If someone takes CeeDee Lamb, cool, just take CMC's too and have fun doing that. Elijah Mitchell is the handcuff option here. We know he struggles to stay healthy. I have him at 85 carries, 365 yards, and 3 TDs. A little bit of receiving work here. I do want to continue to monitor that RB2 spot. As it stands right now, McCaffrey is my RB1 by a little bit over just a little bit over Bijan Robinson. So CMC, RB1, we don't really need to spend much time on CMC, guys. So we'll move into the wide receivers, which does warrant a little bit of our time. I have Brandon Aiyuk, Deebo Samuel, Juwan Jennings, Ricky Pearsall, Jacob Cowing, and Ronnie Bell. They have some new youth added to this offense here. And then Brandon Aiyuk at the top. I fully expect Brandon Aiyuk to lead the team in targets. He is the best receiver on the team. Deebo Samuel is the better playmaker. That includes running the ball. But Aiyuk is going to lead the team in receptions, targets, and receiving yards. He did last year already. I have him at 80 catches, 120 targets, 1,255 yards, and 8 touchdowns. And that's, a spike in receptions and targets. It's decreasing his yards, as last year he was at 17.89 yards per catch. And then I did give him an extra touchdown. So he's still having a really great year. He had a great year last year. I see him compounding that and having a little bit better this year in terms of maybe more consistency, just being more involved, less big plays, but still some big plays for him to gain. And then Deebo Samuel, man, he missed a few games last year, if I recall. But when he was healthy down the stretch, he was an electric, maybe top 5, top 10 wide receiver option in fantasy. I have him at 45 carries, 275 yards, 4 touchdowns as a rusher, 65 catches, 100 total targets, and 985 yards as a receiver with 6 touchdowns there. So both guys are elite. They look great as your wide receiver 2. I don't feel great about them being my wide receiver 1, but I could be wrong there. I do think, if you can get these guys in the end of round 2, early round 3 in your redraft league, you got to feel good about that value. And then we have a huge question at wide receiver 3. They love Juwan Jennings. They extended him. They want him there, but they also drafted Ricky Pearsall in the first round, which is maybe just a hedge on Brandon Aiyuk leaving next year. So we'll watch for the Aiyuk contract. I don't think they're going to pay him. I think they're going to try and extend him. He's going to probably want to walk and go get money elsewhere. But for now, I have Juwan Jennings ahead of Ricky Pearsall, who I like. But I just think, they kind of redshirted Aiyuk his rookie year. They paid Juwan Jennings money. I think he's the better blocker. They're going to use both guys. But we're not really going to care too much for fantasy about the wide receiver 3 spot. The juice with Ricky Pearsall is going to be in dynasty leagues where he could be the wide receiver 1 for this offense in a year or two if Aiyuk and Deebo Samuel are out of the picture. Let's see where I have these wide receivers falling in my rankings. I have Brandon Aiyuk, wide receiver 12, and Deebo, wide receiver 16. So a PPR league is going to favor Aiyuk. If I switch this to half PPR, I would assume Deebo Samuel jumps up to wide receiver 9 in a half PPR league. Aiyuk falls, he stays at wide receiver 12. And then in a standard league, you're going to see Deebo probably go even higher. So if you're playing standard or half PPR leagues, draft Deebo Samuel, man. He's a top 10 wide receiver in those formats. So have fun doing that. And then we don't really need to check in on Pearsall or Juwan Jennings. We'll move on to the tight end position. And, of course, that's George Kittle, Braden Willis, and Cameron Latu. We don't need to worry about the backup tight ends. If something happens to Kittle, Aiyuk and Samuel are going to eat if that does happen. We've seen Kittle miss some time. I love George Kittle. I think he actually might be all tight end traits included, blocking, receiving, and just, yards after catch and things like that. I think Kittle might be the best tight end in the league. He just doesn't get the volume of a Sam Laporta, Travis Kelce, Trey McBride. He's not going to get that volume. I have him at 70 catches, 100 targets, 925 yards, and 7 touchdowns. He had a breakout year last year in yards per catch with 15.69, over 1,000 yards, 65 catches, 90 targets. I have him beating all those numbers except yards. So I love George Kittle. He's going to be a little bit more boom bust. I like him in a best ball format more than I do in a redraft league, just because, it's hard to get Aiyuk, Samuel, Kittle, and CMC all fed in a game. Like, this is one of the most high-powered offenses in the league. Every week there's going to be one guy probably left out. It's going to be very rare where they all hit and are happy for your fantasy lineups. But George Kittle is, again, one of my favorite tight ends to watch. And I do have him at tight end 7. So a fringe, he's a top 5 upside play every week. I think where you're drafting George Kittle, it's a pretty good value. He's usually, tight end 6, 7, 8 off the board, something like that. So continue to draft George Kittle. And final thoughts on the 2024 49ers. I am pretty excited about this team. They had one of the best offensive seasons last year that I've ever seen. Like, Brock Purdy, everything was clicking and humming at the right time. They didn't win the Super Bowl, but I fully expect them to make a run at it again this year. I think if you're drafting in a 1 QB league, you could just wait for Brock Purdy to be your QB1. Otherwise, Superflex leagues, I think Brock Purdy's a dynamite QB2 option for you. And then, we don't need to say anything on CMC. We know he's the 101 or the 102. And then I think you should be interested in pulling a 49ers receiver. I would rather have Aiyuk or Deebo in a redraft league over George Kittle, just because where Kittle's being drafted, I like Kyle Pitts. I like Evan Ingram. I like David Njoku. I have options there. But where you want to draft Aiyuk and Deebo, that's at the end of round 2, early round 3. Those guys stick out to me. I want to be a part of this historic, efficient offense, and they both have amazing upsides and top 5 upsides every week. So I'm drafting all these guys. I think they're all great. You could also take a shot on Elijah Mitchell late in drafts. I don't think much of Isaac Correndo yet. We need to really see how that RB 2-3 battle is shaping up in training camp and preseason. But that's it for me. One more left. One more video left here. The Seattle Seahawks will be my next video. I'm going to try and pump that out soon. But either way, I appreciate your time. Thank you so much. Don't forget to like the video if you made it to the end. Subscribe on YouTube. Follow us on TikTok. And check out thefantasyfellowship.com. Thanks, guys. Peace.